In a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles, a tragedy unfolded behind closed doors. It was a story of extreme neglect, cruelty, and failure. Gabriel Fernandez was an 8-year-old boy whose life was filled with pain and suffering, long before he was taken from this world in the most brutal way possible. But this isn't just the story of one child's death. It's a story of a broken system that failed to protect him at every step. This is the case of Gabriel Fernandez. Gabriel Fernandez was born on February 20th, 2005, in Alhambra, California. A bright-eyed boy with a big smile and an even bigger heart. But by the time he was just 8 years old, he had already faced more trauma than most people will experience in a lifetime. Gabriel's early years were marked by instability. His mother, Pearl Fernandez, had a history of troubled relationships, and Gabriel's life was anything but normal. He spent much of his childhood bouncing between different homes, and his mother, who had a history of drug abuse and criminal behavior, was often absent. At 8, Gabriel was living with his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre. This was supposed to be a new chapter for Gabriel, one where he could feel loved and safe, but instead, it became a nightmare he couldn't escape. Isauro Aguirre, who was 22 years old when they met, quickly became a major figure in Gabriel's life. What started as an abusive relationship with his mother soon turned into something far worse. Together, they would subject Gabriel to unimaginable cruelty. What Gabriel's mother and her boyfriend did to him was unspeakable. Over months, Gabriel was tortured. He was beaten, starved, and locked in small spaces. His body was marked with wounds, bruises, and burns, signs of the terrible abuse he endured. But despite all of this, no one stepped in to save him. The abuse wasn't just physical. Gabriel was mentally tortured as well. He was told that no one cared about him, that he was worthless. His tormentors even began to punish him for the smallest mistakes, things that any child should be able to do, like eating or talking. There were warning signs. Teachers, doctors, and neighbors all noticed that something wasn't right. Gabriel's teachers saw him come to school covered in bruises. A doctor noted that his body showed signs of neglect and abuse. His classmates said he often came to school hungry, exhausted, and afraid. But despite the warnings, no one acted. Gabriel's case slipped through the cracks of the child welfare system. As the abuse continued, it only got worse. In May 2013, Gabriel's life would come to a tragic and brutal end. After a horrific beating, Gabriel was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. His body had been left broken by the very people who were supposed to protect him. Gabriel was declared brain dead shortly after he was taken to the hospital. The doctors said that his injuries were consistent with being tortured. His broken bones, internal bleeding, burns, and numerous bruises. But it wasn't just the physical damage that took his life. It was the total neglect, the lack of any love or compassion from the people who should have cared for him. Pearl Fernandez and Isauro Aguirre were both arrested and charged with Gabriel's murder. Their trial would expose the extent of the abuse Gabriel had suffered and the failure of the people and systems that should have intervened to save him. The trial was shocking. Aguirre showed no remorse for his actions, claiming that he was simply disciplining Gabriel. Pearl Fernandez, on the other hand, tried to blame Aguirre for everything, but it was clear she had played a role in the abuse. In 2018, Isauro Aguirre was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Pearl Fernandez was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, and she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But for many, this wasn't enough. Gabriel Fernandez's life had been taken so brutally, and the consequences for his killers felt inadequate in comparison to the suffering he endured. The case of Gabriel Fernandez sparked nationwide outrage, leading to a renewed focus on child welfare. People demanded accountability for the failures in the child protective system and better protection for children who are at risk. The story of Gabriel Fernandez is one of pain, loss, and broken promises, but it's also a reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect those who are vulnerable, to speak up when something is wrong, to make sure no child suffers the way Gabriel did. As we remember Gabriel, we must also ask ourselves, how can we make sure this never happens again? Gabriel Fernandez deserved a life full of love and care. Let's honor his memory by standing up for the children who still need our protection. This is the story of Gabriel Fernandez, A story that should never have been.